presence. It was a cold day out. The sun was gone and the wind came from the north, making it even colder. It was around noon, and it was time for me to bring the dogs out for a walk. I brought them down to the road that leads to my house. Nobody was around and it was silent all over, except for the wind blowing through the tree leaves. I was calm, but then it felt like I was being followed. Of course my dogs were following me. This feeling was dark. I continued and eventually turned back to go home. Everyone was gone, so I arrived to an empty house. As I was about to bring the dogs into their kennel, I noticed one of the Aussies was frozen in place, staring into the woods. I tried to get his attention, but he would not budge. I walked over to him, pat his head. He only growled. Not to me. He growled to whatever was in the woods. The dog was pacing, tail tucked between his legs and ears held back. That made me feel uneasy, as I had been feeling watched or followed during the walk. It also meant I wasn't the only one who felt it. I decided to be safe and locked the door when I was inside. I'd like to say this feeling left after a while, but no. It only became more frequent. I had to lock and cover my windows at night because it felt as though someone was peering through them. I told people about it, especially those I lived with. They'd tell me it was a bear or maybe some ghost. A few even mentioned that it could be a stalker. I knew it was neither of these things. It just didn't feel right. Fast forward to about 3 months after the first occurrence. It's September, and the weather has begun to get colder. I was outside with my dogs cleaning some skulls I had recently gotten from the trapper. I was just minding my own business. All of my family members were gone, so I was left alone again. Then, I went near the forest and felt the dark presence again. It was so strange. I just couldn't shake it off as nothing. Scared, I went inside and decided to make myself some food in the comfort of my home. The fear left, and I felt safe again, until I heard the dreadful sound coming from the woods outside. It sounded like a man screaming, a deer howling in pain, the low growl of a bear, all at once. It was the scariest thing I've ever heard in my life. I checked all the doors and ran to the second story of the house to hide. Not sure why I felt so much fear, since I heard nothing after that. But I called a relative. They told me I was just hearing things. That night, I could barely sleep. I was afraid of whatever this thing was going to come inside. I kept seeing things in the shadows of the trees after this incident. It was hard to ignore. Eventually, I went to live with my mother in the city. I was there for a better chance at a job. I also had some friends to reunite with there. Once I moved, I met up with my childhood best friend. She and I decided to take a long walk in the chilly temperatures of the night. We talked and talked. Nothing happened until about 11:30. We were crossing the street when I heard the same exact sound, but much louder, coming from the woods down the road.
Be careful while I'm
I was terrified. My friend, though, paid no attention to it. We continued walking, but I was a little more paranoid than before, just waiting for something to jump out after me. An hour passed and we had to split ways. She went home and I did too. I had some instrumental music playing on my phone to keep me calm. Obviously, that didn't last long. Of course, something had to happen in the dead of night while I was alone. As I walked in the streets, I heard a baby scream, but it didn't sound normal. It was a horrifying, distorted scream. I looked in the direction of the sound and thought I saw someone there. My feet moved faster than before, trying to get me home. Then I heard another scream, much scarier than the first. I ran for it. That might not have been the best decision, but it was instinctive. Suddenly, I heard feet hitting the pavement. Felt like something or someone was chasing me. I looked back quickly and thought I saw a large black figure coming, but it only lasted several seconds till I saw nothing. The The shouts and screams did not stop, though. I finally got home, but I realized the door was locked and couldn't get inside. Unfortunately, those screams continued. After many calls and pressing the doorbell, my stepfather opened the door. I was a hyperventilating mess, but I got through it. I'm very spiritual, and I've been told by many mediums or spiritual leaders that I am a beacon for bad spirits. I assumed that it was a bad spirit. I remember reading about wendigos, a creature that is apparently connected to me in some ways that are unknown to me. I did research again and deeply believe that whatever followed me is still watching me. I'm not sure if it's a wendigo, but it could be. Some acquaintances agree that it is quite possible. Now I'm just waiting for my next encounter with it, and I'm left wondering, what does it want? What will it do next?
Barrier is down. My scan showed the Fallen used arc energy from Exodus Tech to control everything here, including the
Let me start off by saying that I am a larger 15-year-old male with two brothers who we'll call Will and Scott. Will is my twin brother, while Scott is our older 17-year-old brother. We live in a very safe, small mountain town by the name of Boone, here in North Carolina, where we attend a local high school. Before I get too deep into the story, I'd like to give a little background information. I've lived in Boone my entire life. Having moved here once my brother Will and I were born, there are many other kids our age here, and at the end of the street live Mr. and Mrs. Phillips. Mrs. Phillips always loved joking around and playing with the children of the neighborhood. I believe she did this as their own children died in a drunk driving accident. Sadly, last year, Mrs. Phillips died and shook our community as she was a very well-respected member of our neighborhood, who everyone loved and very dearly enjoyed. Mr. Phillips, on the other hand, was a lot rowdier. It always seemed to have something to complain about. That being said, he was always nice to me, and he'd always say I reminded him of his dead son Andrew. This always made me feel somewhat sad, and after Mrs. Phillips' death, Mr. Phillips went somewhat crazy. One December morning, I decided I would brave the cold and skip on riding with my brothers so I could sit next to a girl I liked on the bus. I began my 5 to 10 minute walk to the bus stop when I noticed Mr. Phillips' truck idling in the driveway. Most of the vehicles in the neighborhood were doing the same, so I thought nothing of it, continuing my trek at the bottom of the street. On the way down, I noticed a dog in the window, and being the immature teen I was at the time, I decided to shout loudly, which of course got the dog all riled up and barking. Suddenly, I heard a very loud engine roar to life. Back, I noticed Mr. Phillips' truck going about 35 miles above the speed limit, heading straight for me with no signs of going around me. His truck got about 10 feet away from me. I dove for the ditch, at which point I looked back to see if Mr. Phillips was going to slow down, check if I was okay. He didn't. Instead, he was cackling like a madman and yelling out of his truck window that I need to pay attention to where I'm walking next time, or he will hit me. I was shocked at Mr. Phillips' actions, but I decided not to tell my parents about what had happened, both to avoid trouble, because I knew my dad would probably kick his ass, and didn't want him to get hurt, or any sort of legal trouble. As time went on, we saw less and less of Mr. Phillips, who mostly stayed at his home and drank whiskey. If Mr. Phillips needed something, his nephew Jake would get it for him. In some ways, I felt happy as I knew if he was inside, Mr. Phillips wouldn't be a dick to everyone in town. Yet, some part of me also felt sadness. Like this guy I'd grown up knowing, used to do things like give us $5 bills just because he felt like it, and would sometimes hold dodgeball games with the kids in the neighborhood. Now he'd become a husk of his former self, only bitter, angry. I say all of this because he soon began complaining about my older walker coon-hound named Jack, that I had had since I was 4. Jack would go out to pee in the mornings, and sometimes he'd wander in Mr. Phillips' yard, scratching around, looking for scraps around his barbecue pit. Almost every other day, Mr. Phillips would now come pounding on my door, telling me to get my dog out of his yard. Because of this, I began letting Jack out less and less until one summer morning, feeling tired, I let him out to do his business anyways, before going back to bed, wanting to hear him bark to come back in. After 2 hours of not hearing Jack, my brother and I went outside and looked for him. We thought that maybe he was snagged a deer or something, but at his age, it was getting quite hard to do. Our worry began to grow when we called his name all up and down the street but never got a response. Out of options, we eventually went home and called my close friend Ryan. Soon after, we used Ryan's truck to slowly go up and down the street looking for our dog Jack. When we approached Mr. Phillips' house, I was just going to ignore him, but he waved at us before smiling. If you want something done correctly, do it yourself. Confused, I asked him if he had seen our dog Jack, to which he responded in an almost laughing voice. I think I saw him in your backyard. Relieved we finally knew where he was, my brother headed back to our home before approaching the backyard. To our shock and horror, we found our 11-year-old best friend Jack hanging from a tree and clearly dead. I fell to my knees in tears, not wanting to believe what I was seeing. My sweet dog had been murdered. I felt my older brother grab my arm and tell me we need to go inside to call 911. Dragging me inside, did just that. And when the police arrived, they cut down Jack and offered to take him in. But I told them no, and let them know we could bury him. When we finally were questioned, I told them about Mr. Phillips, and I know I was sure he had killed my dog. They soon headed over to that bastard's house where he was still smiling, before talking to him for about 15 minutes and returning, telling us they didn't have sufficient evidence that he was the one who put our dog, so they couldn't arrest him. By this time, my mother was home early from the situation and raising hell to arrest him. Sadly, never did. The old son of a bitch got away with murdering my dog and almost running me over, though I never told anyone about that. I eventually decided if the law wasn't going to give me justice, then I would do it myself. One day, I took my lacrosse stick and a bucket of balls out of 50 yards up the hill where Mr. Phillips lived. I soon began launching the balls at his home, breaking 2 windows before he finally came out to confront me. Mr. Williams told me to stop, at which point I threw him in the middle finger and tried launching a ball at his chest. It hit him in the thigh, and he fell over before I decided to run. Locking my doors at home, I realized after the fact what I did was probably a bad idea. A week later, Mr. Phillips' windows were fixed. One day, I was just about to doze off when I woke to the sound of my window shutting. I was terrified and didn't look, but I knew it was like Mr. Phillips. I felt my bed sink and a knife was pressed against my calf before I heard Mr. Phillips whispering. Be ashamed, big, strong lacrosse player like you had his calf cut wide open, wouldn't it? I screamed for my dad, and Mr. Phillips escaped out the window, leaving it open. My parents believed my story and called the cops who came over, but after questioning Mr. Phillips, they claimed they had no evidence that it happened, so they still couldn't do anything. Mr. Phillips was once again let go, no charges against him. My parents eventually installed cameras and filed a restraining order against him, but every couple of days I'd hear him outside singing his old war songs, and on one occasion, Beastie Boys would scare me even more. Finally, he came to the backyard one night with a bottle of booze and began singing something that sounded like this. My time is up, bad one. My wife is dead and nobody cares. Go to hell, go to hell. Gonna end it all, gonna end it all. My dad and I watched him and even began to chuckle at one point because he was so crazy. Mr. Phillips wasn't a liar, however, because the next day on his wife's birthday, he shot himself on her gravesite. Well, tarnation, brother. Those small town stories surely creeped me out. Especially that last one. Holy crap, keep Mr. Phillips away from me, huh? If you like these stories, be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not subscribe and turn on notifications, as I upload videos almost every single day on all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story you'd like to share in a future video, send it in to swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. I have some cool merch designs you can check out. The link is also in the description below. We'd love to see you wearing the Swamp Dweller shirts. And I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video. Do you live in the middle of nowhere? Have you seen something that just wasn't quite right? Well, these 5 people certainly claim that they have. These stories will truly creep you out tonight. If you have a story you'd like to share on the channel, be sure to